Microsoft announced its Q2 earnings just last week, and there's a lot of similarities to their prior earnings calls, right? Even though their stock didn't necessarily do so well after it. Of course, that's not necessarily uncommon nowadays for these large IT vendors. But look, they had 17% growth on their total revenue. It was like $81 billion for the quarter. It came in actually above than analysts expected. I think it was like 80.27 billion. The gross margin was a little bit under. It's the narrowest in 3 years, they said. It was still 68%. A lot of that had to do with the fact that they're making all these large investments in AI, AI infrastructure specifically. Commercial bookings was up 260% or 230% for the quarter, rather. A lot of that had to do, and they said this about commitments from OpenAI and Anthropic. The RPO, commercial RPO, massive number, $625 billion, up 110%. Again, that has a lot to do with the really massive OpenAI deal that they announced. Microsoft Cloud revenue, obviously very important for all of you out there, the customers out there, because you're heavily invested. $51.5 billion, up 25%. To think about that, the growth on that is the commercial cloud revenue growth, rather, the Microsoft 365 commercial revenue growth was 17%. That's actually accelerating. Last Q2 was 16%. So again, Microsoft 365 commercial cloud revenue. So all of you out there, that's a big one for you. You're driving that number for them, right? It's still accelerating. A lot of that had to do with Copilot and E5. They called that out. We'll get into that a little bit in a minute. As you all know, like if you're considering Copilot or adding Copilot or growing Copilot or thinking about moving to E5, massive amount of leverage if done correctly, right? It's really that simple, right? It's not just, hey, I'm giving you this so I expect great pricing. Don't go in with that mindset. You still have to go force it, but it's achievable. Let's talk Azure, right? So Azure and cloud revenue, services revenue growth was 39%. Again, that's accelerating. Last Q2 was 31% growth, and it even came in right around where analysts expected. I'll talk about guidance in a second, but let's talk AI. I think this is really important. All of you know this. If you're a customer of Microsoft or any of these tech vendors, they're obviously heavily aggressively pushing. They need the revenue. They need to show the investment community adoption. They need to justify those massive AI infrastructure investments that they're making that are drawing down on their margins. They had 35,000 seats, like that base. Customers that have 35,000 seats have grown triple year over year. Now, I'd be very careful about that. As many of you know, there's ways to manipulate that number, how many are paid, as a perfect example. But still, that's impressive. The number of seat adds of Microsoft 365 Copilot was up 160% year over year. Again, you got to look into those numbers a little bit, but obviously this is a number they're reporting. So if you're growing at all, there's massive leverage in that. Like you started out with a small amount of Copilot, you're growing. Now they're going to want you to grow to the 35,000. In other words, your biggest volume that you could possibly give them, right? And many of you in the conversation I'm having can't get there. But any growth is still important because it adds to that seat growth number that they're reporting. Remind them that you know that. Now, talked about paid. I'll give them credit on this. They did say there's 15 million paid Microsoft 365 Copilot seats. As far as I'm aware, and I pay pretty close attention, that's the first time they announced that. So again, kudos to them. Now, what does paid mean? How much are they paying, right? They didn't give the actual revenue number, and I don't expect them to for a while, if ever. But at least they are announcing that. And then all up, meaning all Copilot. 4.7 million paid Copilot subscriptions. That's up 75%. That's GitHub, that's Copilot Studio, that's Dragon, it's all of it. So again, Copilot, all of you know this is incredibly important across all of it. But here's the thing. Well, we also know, because when they report these numbers, it's not just important to them, it's important to your sales rep. And I will tell you right now, many customers that I'm talking with and my team are talking with, they're not necessarily thinking about growing the number or starting to make a commitment. They're actually thinking about keeping it flat or maybe even decreasing until they figure their things out. Understand that Microsoft is going to push back aggressively if that's your position. But also know that if you do this right, if you get ahead of it, if you strategize, if you get the right people in the room for Microsoft, you can take back the control, create leverage even in that scenario. Guidance. Let's talk guidance. Q3, 80.65 to 81.75 billion for the quarter. That'd be 17% growth. They're expecting the Microsoft commercial cloud revenue to grow 13 to 14%. They continue to talk about it'll be on the backs of Copilot and E5. A lot of you out there, again, remember, they put these numbers out there. They need to keep you growing, but make them earn it. And on the Azure front, 37 to 38% growth is what they're expecting. Again, that's very important, right? That's another massively important area for them. They talk about it during the earnings calls all the time. Obviously, the competitive landscape, GCP, AWS, hyperscaler scenarios that drive that. So again, if you can pull all this together, including things like LinkedIn, into one negotiation, one approach, I would highly recommend that, right? Don't let them keep things siloed. Understand that each piece matters to them, and you may be able to offer them more than one piece. But how they behave in one area, E5, E3 price increases, unified support digging in and taking away previous concessions, LinkedIn discounting going away, Azure not really giving you more discounting or concessions or credits, even though you're giving a bigger commitment under a Mac. I mean, these things are very important, but remind them that how they behave in one area impacts everything else. Build that story, get ahead of it, especially those that have June renewals. Now, during the earnings call, I think the thing that stood out the most, there's always a lot, right? But Satya got up there and he said, one of the more exciting things for me are these new agent systems. Now, part of what he's talking about here is when he announced last quarter they have the Agent 365. But he goes on to say Microsoft 365 Copilot, GitHub Copilot, Security Copilot, all coming together to compound the benefits of all the data and all the deployment. I think this is probably the most transformative effect right now, right? It's the story of them selling one holistic piece. It's not one Copilot. It's not one agent. It's not one set of data. You need to pull all this together, and Microsoft is the vendor that you can do that with. That's their pitch. And if you think about what I just told you, let them make it, but then remind them, that sounds nice, holistic, but you're talking about holistic things that would be new. You're talking about holistic things that matter to you right now. But what about the holistic side that I'm thinking about? Product, support, LinkedIn, Azure, all of it. What about the fact that if I add Copilot, what are you doing for me on the E3? What are you doing for me on my SQL on-premise subscription or licenses? Is that holistic too? Where are you on this front? So again, if you approach Microsoft the right way, if you pay attention to what matters to them, if you build the right strategy, give yourself the right time, arm yourself with the right data, right? You can overcome the leverage that Microsoft always brings to these conversations, especially now more than ever, because they actually are in a position of needing and wanting from their customers. Just make sure you take this time to do it right.